The galaxy hung in a delicate balance, its ancient empires locked in a cold war that stretched across star systems, like a web of tension and suspicion for centuries. The Gorgath, a race of colossal warriors, forged in the heat of conflict, had long ruled through fear. Their massive ships and brutal tactics made them almost untouchable. The Loliethi, on the other hand, were a cunning race of diplomats and assassins, their fleets sleek and quick, their minds sharp as blades. They, too, had carved out their empire with subtlety and deadly precision, neither side willing to yield an inch, both sides stubborn in their pride. It seemed as though the universe was destined to remain a powder keg with Earth caught in the middle of it all. The United Earth Federation was young and still growing its place in the galactic community. Shaky at best, Earth had only recently become aware of the wider cosmos, and its inhabitants, after their first ventures into space, revealed a universe far more complex than they had ever imagined. Humanity had spent decades trying to understand the politics and the rivalries of these ancient species, yet despite their rapid technological advancements and brilliant minds, they had remained on the periphery. Humanity's greatest strength was its adaptability, its ability to learn and innovate. But against the backdrop of civilizations millennia-old, humanity's voice was just a whisper in the wind. But whispers can grow into roars, and the Federation's leadership understood that the galaxy's changing tides could offer a chance for Earth to carve out its own destiny. Yet it was a dangerous game. Diplomacy was everything, and power was held by those who had mastered the art of domination, not by the freshly arrived humans, whose presence was often seen as nothing more than a passing curiosity, a speck in the vastness of space. Still, Earth was cautious. There was no immediate desire to confront the giants of the galaxy. Instead, Earth's representatives had spent years trying to build alliances and friendships, all the while maintaining a strict neutrality between the warring factions. But neutrality in such an environment is a dangerous thing. For Ambassador Isabella Cole, the stakes were always clear. She had been trained for this kind of work. Her life had been devoted to diplomacy, navigating the complex webs of alien politics, where one wrong word could mean the end of a career or worse, the end of a life. Yet even Isabella knew that the time for neutrality was coming to an end. There was no escaping it, no avoiding the inevitable decision that would have to be made sooner or later. Earth would have to take a side or risk being swallowed whole by the conflict surrounding them. And now it seemed that time had arrived. As the war drums beat louder in the distance, the Gorgath and the Alyathi had reached an impasse. Their ancient enmity had reached a point where words no longer held sway, and there was only one path forward. The summit on Drethar would be the last attempt at peace, a final opportunity to prevent the galaxy from falling into total chaos. Isabella Cole had been chosen to represent humanity at this crucial gathering. As Earth's best hope for a peaceful resolution, she was not naive enough to think she could achieve miracles. But she knew that her presence there could make a difference. It was her chance to show the galaxy that humanity was no longer just a bystander. They were here to play a role in the future of the stars. Ambassador Isabella Cole stood on the deck of the starship Vanguard as it glided through the starry expanse toward Drethar, a planet caught in the crossfire between the Gorgath and the Liathi. The planet itself was a barren wasteland, scarred by centuries of conflict. Yet it had been chosen as the location for this critical peace summit. Drethar was neutral ground, a place where both empires could meet without the history of violence that defined their homeworlds. The atmosphere aboard the ship was tense. A quiet hum filled the corridors as officers and diplomats alike prepared for what would be the most important meeting of their careers. No one quite knew what to expect. Isabella felt the weight of the moment press down on her shoulders. Her mission was clear: prevent a war that could consume the galaxy. Yet the task ahead seemed almost insurmountable. The Gorgath were not a people known for their diplomacy. They were a warrior race who believed in strength above all else. Their leaders were brutal and unyielding, and their ships were armed with enough firepower to wipe out entire fleets with a single strike. The Alyathi, on the other hand, had spent millennia perfecting the art of negotiation, but beneath their sleek exteriors lay a ruthless streak, a subtle cruelty that made them just as dangerous as their foes, if not more so. To them, power was often won through words and manipulations, not battles. Yet both factions had a single thing in common: an overwhelming desire to crush each other for good. Humanity had only recently entered the galactic stage, and while Earth's technology had advanced at a startling rate, it was still far behind in terms of the raw power of these ancient civilizations. What humanity lacked in firepower, it made up for with ingenuity and unity. Humans were flexible, adaptable, always ready to change the way they approached problems. Yet in this new world, where power was measured in fleets and firepower, Isabella knew that these qualities would not be enough to sway the hearts of the galaxy's superpowers. It was her ability to navigate the political labyrinth that would be the key to securing peace or plunging the galaxy into war. As the Vanguard approached Drethar's orbit, Isabella gathered her team in the briefing room, her closest advisors, standing at attention ready to go over the final details of their plan for the summit. She scanned the room briefly, noting the anxiety in their eyes. It was rare that Earth's diplomats had been given such an important mission, and everyone understood the stakes too well. This is more than just about diplomacy, she began, her voice calm yet resolute. It's about survival, Earth's survival in the coming galaxy. We cannot afford to fail here. We are humanity's last hope. Her words hung in the air for a moment before her chief negotiator, Lieutenant Mara Tyler, spoke. Ambassador Cole, we've received word that both factions are already growing impatient. They believe the summit is a formality at best. Both sides are looking for a reason to escalate the conflict. Isabella nodded, her eyes narrowing with a mix of concern and determination. We'll have to make sure they don't get that reason, she replied. Our role here is not to make concessions or compromise, but to show both sides that there is another path, one that doesn't involve destroying each other and taking the rest of the galaxy down with them. With the briefing complete, the team dispersed, and Isabella walked to the observation deck. As Drethar grew larger in the viewport, she took a deep breath. The challenges ahead were monumental, but one thing was clear: if she could succeed at this summit, the galaxy would know that Earth was no longer a distant observer. It would know that humanity had arrived with a purpose. The moment the Vanguard entered Drethar's orbit, Isabella could feel the gravity of the situation pressing in on her like a physical weight. Outside, the planet loomed in silent defiance, a scared, desolate world surrounded by the cold void. Despite its lifeless surface, Drethar was the site of the most important diplomatic event in the galaxy's recent history. The air aboard the Vanguard had shifted from tense anticipation to a deep, suffocating pressure. As the crew prepared for the summit, the weight of failure seemed to hang just as heavily as the potential for success. Isabella stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling viewport, her eyes fixed on the planet as her thoughts raced. The Elyathi delegation had arrived a day before, sleek ships carving through space with all the grace and precision of a predator on the hunt. The Gorgath, however, had arrived in a far more imposing manner. Their fleet of massive warships filled the skies like dark clouds, their presence an unmistakable declaration of dominance. Despite the neutrality of Drethar, both sides had come prepared for war, their pride and hatred so deeply entrenched that any attempt at reconciliation seemed almost laughable. She turned to face her team. Lieutenant Mara Tyler stood at attention, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a quiet urgency. Ambassador Cole, she began, we've received word from both factions. They're already talking about the terms of battle, and neither side is open to negotiation. Tell them to hold their fire, Isabella replied sharply, her voice steady but firm. We're not here to cater to their war games. We're here to end this. Tyler nodded, though Isabella could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The task ahead was monumental. How could any diplomat hope to defuse a conflict that had raged for centuries? How could one person, even with Earth's backing, stand between two titans that had long defined the galaxy's balance of power? Ambassador, you should know that we've arranged meetings with both sides for the evening, Tyler continued. The Gorgath are already preparing their weapons for a show of force, and the Elyathi, well, they're not as subtle as they think. If we fail to show strength, we'll be treated like the child trying to play with the adults. Isabella's mind raced. She had prepared for every possible scenario. But the unpredictable nature of galactic politics often turned even the most meticulous plans into rubble. Still, she knew one thing with certainty. She could not afford to back down. the fate of the galaxy, and humanity's place within it, depended on this summit. "The time for subtlety is over," she said, her voice resolute. "We have to show them that humanity is more than just a pawn on their board. If they won't listen to reason, they will have to listen to strength." As the hours passed, Isabella met with both the Gorgath and Ulyathi leaders in a tense series of private sessions. The Gorgath leader, General Okrath, was a towering figure, his skin a rough, stone-like texture, his eyes burning with contempt. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, glaring at Isabella from across the table. "Human," he rumbled, his voice a deep, guttural growl. "You think you can change the fate of the galaxy. Your kind is weak, and your alliances are fragile." Isabella met his gaze without flinching. "You may be right about our strength," she said coolly, "but we are not fragile, and we are not weak. Your war has dragged on for far too long. There are countless lives at stake. I've come here to stop this madness, not to indulge in your pride." The words hit their mark, and for a moment, Okrath's expression softened, but it was clear that the Gorgath were not easily swayed by reason alone. Next, she faced the Ulyathi delegation, led by Ambassador Viren, a silver-tongued diplomat whose demeanor was all polished smiles and hidden daggers. He didn't even pretend to be interested in peace at first. "Ambassador Cole," he said with a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes, "I trust you understand the futility of your efforts. The Gorgath will never bow to diplomacy. They will only understand force." Isabella wasn't fooled. "And you would rather fight than seek peace?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "What does that say about you and your people?" The Ulyathi ambassador faltered for a split second, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. It was small, but Isabella had seen it. She had found the chink in their armor. By the time the summit began in full, tensions had reached a boiling point. Both sides were itching for an excuse to escalate the conflict, but Isabella knew one thing. The power of her words was the only thing keeping the galaxy from spiraling into chaos. The question was, how long would that hold? And how long before one wrong move sparked the war she was desperately trying to prevent? The summit hall was an imposing structure, a vast chamber lined with alien symbols and holographic projections of the stars themselves. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating reminder of what was at stake. Ambassador Isabella Cole stood at the center of the room, facing the assembled representatives of the Gorgath and the Ulyathi, their expressions as cold and unyielding as the stars outside the viewport. Around her, the team from Earth watched in silence, knowing that this moment would determine the fate of billions. But Isabella knew that the outcome of this summit was no longer entirely in her hands. The atmosphere was charged with an electric kind of inevitability, and for the first time in her career, she felt the weight of the galaxy itself pressing down on her shoulders. General Okrath of the Gorgath stood across from her, a hulking figure whose very presence seemed to bend the space around him. His eyes, burning with barely restrained fury, never left her face. The Ulyathi ambassador, Viren, stood with a calculating smile on his lips, his fingers lightly tapping the surface of the table as if he were playing a game. Though the stakes were far from trivial. Both factions were there not to negotiate peace, but to find reasons to escalate the war. Isabella had known this from the start, but now, as the moment to speak approached, the truth of the situation felt all the more crushing. "We are gathered here today," Isabella began, her voice clear and unwavering, "to prevent a war that could consume not just your empires, but every living thing in this galaxy. The conflict between the Gorgath and the Ulyathi has lasted for centuries, and countless lives have already been lost. This summit is not an opportunity to prove who is stronger or more righteous. It is a final chance to prove that your people are capable of something greater than war." A low murmur passed through the room, but Okrath's voice cut through it like a thunderclap. "You speak of peace, human," he growled, his eyes narrowing. "But peace does not come to the weak. It comes to the strong. The Gorgath have fought and bled for our place in this galaxy. We will not kneel to the Liathi or anyone else." Viren smiled smoothly, his voice a silken thread of venom. "And yet, General, you forget one thing," he said, his tone dripping with superiority. "Strength is not always defined by brute force. The Liathi understand the subtleties of power. We know how to shape events with words, how to turn enemies into allies without lifting a single blade." He glanced at Isabella, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Perhaps your species could learn something from that." Isabella clenched her jaw but remained composed. "Your arrogance blinds you both," she said firmly, "and it will be your undoing. You think strength is only measured by warships and weapons, by bloodshed and destruction. But true strength comes from the ability to build, to protect, and to create something that lasts. You both have the power to destroy everything, but you also have the power to change the course of history." Her words lingered in the air, an undeniable challenge. The room fell silent. For a fleeting moment, Isabella felt something shift. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She had planted a seed. Whether it would grow or wither, she couldn't know, but she couldn't afford to back down now. Not when she had already come so far. Okrath's growl rumbled through the room. "And why should we listen to you, human? You who have only just discovered the galaxy. You who think that you can change the fate of those who have ruled for eons." He took a step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. "Your words are empty. Your people are nothing but children playing at a game they don't understand." Isabella held her ground. "If you won't listen to reason, then perhaps you'll listen to this," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "Humanity is no longer the insignificant race you think it is. We are not here to beg for peace. We are here to offer it. And we will not leave until you understand that the galaxy cannot continue on this path of destruction." A silence fell. The Gorgath glared, their eyes burning with fury, but even they could sense the force in Isabella's words. The Liathi, always calculating, seemed more interested in the implications of what had been said. Isabella's heart raced, but she didn't show it. She had to keep the momentum going. "Humanity is not here to take sides," she continued, "but to stop the war before it consumes us all. If you refuse to see reason, you will force Earth into a position where we can no longer remain neutral. And when that happens, neither of you will be able to survive what's coming." Viren's smile faltered for the briefest moment. He had underestimated the humans, but whether that realization would be enough to sway him, enough to sway either of them, remained to be seen. Isabella waited for their response, every fiber of her being straining against the weight of the decision she knew was coming. Would they back down? Would they finally listen to reason, or would she have to make the unthinkable choice to push humanity into a war it wasn't yet prepared for? The galaxy's future hung on the next word spoken in that room, and Isabella, for the first time, wondered if peace was truly possible, or if the war was already too far gone. The chamber was thick with uncertainty, as though the very air had frozen in place. Isabella could feel the shift, the faintest glimmer of doubt creeping into the minds of the Gorgath and the Liathi. But it was fragile, fleeting, and the next word spoken would decide whether it crumbled or took root. General Okrath's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, the weight of centuries of pride and bloodlust bearing down on his words. "You think your threats will move us," he spat. "Your people are children, and you stand here pretending to wield the power of the stars themselves. The Gorgath fear no one. We will crush anyone who stands in our way, human or otherwise." Isabella met his glare head-on. She could feel the tremor of anger in her chest, but she quelled it, choosing instead to speak with quiet authority. "The Gorgath may not fear anyone, General, but fear alone will not win this war. You've fought for centuries, and where has it gotten you? A never-ending cycle of death and destruction. A future built on ashes. Is that the legacy you want?" A heavy silence fell, as Okrath's rage simmered beneath the surface, but his silence spoke louder than any retort. Viren, the Ulyathi ambassador, was watching her intently, his silver eyes gleaming with an unreadable expression. He leaned forward, his voice cool and sharp. "Perhaps the human is right, General," Viren mused, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "It is true that endless war has brought nothing but ruin. Perhaps it is time to rethink our approach." His gaze flicked to Isabella. "But how do we know that your species will deliver on these promises? That you are not simply making empty threats?" Isabella took a deep breath. She had anticipated this, expected it even. The Ulyathi were always calculating, always looking for a reason to turn the tables, to manipulate a situation for their advantage. But they were not invincible. "We're not here to make promises, Ambassador. We're here to make a choice," she replied, her voice steady and unyielding. "A choice between continuing this destructive path or forging something new, something better." The words hung between them like a challenge, daring either side to accept or reject it. The Gorgeth growled under their breath, visibly irritated, but even they could not ignore the truth in her words. Viren's face remained impassive, but there was something more in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, a recognition that perhaps the humans were not as powerless as they had once assumed. Isabella's mind raced, calculating her next move. This was a delicate moment. She knew that pushing too hard would lead to an immediate collapse of the talks, but showing weakness would do the same. They needed to see that Earth was willing to take risks, willing to act, even if it meant stepping away from the table entirely. "What do you want, then?" Okrath finally snarled, his patience clearly worn thin. "You talk of forging a future. What does that mean? If you think we'll just give up our positions because you ask nicely, you're gravely mistaken. I never said you should give up your power, General," Isabella said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "But I'm offering you something that your empires have never had. A chance to change the course of history. You can keep your fleets, your warriors, your dominance, but only if you agree to work with us. If you choose war, you choose annihilation. If you choose peace, you choose a future where the Gorgeth and the Ulyathi can coexist with those who have suffered under your rule." The room fell silent again. The words were out there, hanging in the air, unanswered. The Gorgeth and Ulyathi were not used to hearing such blunt, unyielding language from a race they considered insignificant. But it wasn't the words alone that had the power. It was the choice they posed. A choice to either remain in a deadlock, perpetuating an endless cycle of violence, or to evolve into something more, something that could lead to a lasting peace. Viren was the first to break the silence, though his words were carefully measured, as if weighing every syllable. "You speak of peace, Ambassador Cole, but how many times have we seen such promises broken? How many times have we seen empires rise on the backs of weaklings promising the impossible? What makes you think this time will be different?" "I don't expect you to trust us right away," Isabella replied, her voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. "But I do expect you to recognize that this is your final opportunity. The galaxy is watching, and the choice is yours. The question isn't whether we can win the war, it's whether you can afford to lose." For a long moment, neither side responded. Okrath looked away first, his expression unreadable, but his clenched fists betrayed the fury simmering just beneath the surface. Viren remained still, his face a mask of calculation. But Isabella could sense that something was shifting, slowly, imperceptibly. The walls of stubbornness that had kept the galaxy locked in conflict for so long were beginning to crack. Whether that crack would widen into a chasm of change or be sealed shut by pride remained to be seen. But in that moment, Isabella knew one thing for sure. Humanity had made its mark. Whether peace could be achieved or not, the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The question now was whether either side could rise above their hatred, or if the war would be their undoing. The tension in the summit hall was palpable. Every breath Isabella took seemed to echo in the silent void between the Gorgeth and the Ulyathi. It was a fragile peace, one that hung by a thread, But it was a thread she had woven herself, carefully and with purpose. The silence stretched, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the next move. General Okrath was the first to break the stillness, his booming voice shattering the fragile calm. "You have no idea what you're asking, human," he growled, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles whitened. "You speak of coexistence, but the Gorgeth were not built to coexist. We were born to dominate. You want us to give up centuries of power and sacrifice for peace. Why should we? To appease the weak." Isabella didn't flinch. She had expected this. The Gorgeth were a proud and ruthless race, bound by a warrior's code that valued strength above all else. She knew she couldn't break them with just words. But she also knew that for the first time, the Gorgeth were actually listening, and that, in itself, was a victory. "The question isn't whether you can dominate," Isabella said, her voice unwavering. "The question is whether you can survive. You've fought and bled for your empire, but it's dying. The Elyethi have infiltrated your networks, your alliances. Your strength, as you know it, is faltering. If you choose war, you will burn everything, including your empire. And this time, you will not rise from the ashes." The Gorgeth general's eyes flashed with a dangerous light, but before he could respond, Viren's voice sliced through the tension. The Elyethi ambassador, ever the opportunist, smiled thinly, his expression a perfect blend of mockery and calculation. "Perhaps, General, it is time we considered the human's proposal," Viren said smoothly, his voice carrying an almost musical cadence. "I understand your desire to preserve your strength, Okrath, but the galaxy is changing. There are new players, and there are new threats. The question is no longer whether we fight, but what we fight for. And if we are wise, we may find that there is more to gain by listening to these humans than by continuing this pointless war." Isabella's eyes narrowed as she studied the Elyethi ambassador. He was playing a dangerous game, trying to use her words against the Gorgeth. But she wasn't about to let him control the narrative. "You may be right, Ambassador," she said, keeping her voice steady, "but your people have underestimated the cost of this war. The Gorgeth have their pride, but you have your arrogance. Both of you have become so focused on your own superiority that you've lost sight of what's really at stake." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle in. "This is not just about who controls the galaxy. This is about survival. The rest of the galaxy is watching you. If you continue to fight, you will push them into the arms of others who will not hesitate to rise against you. You are not invincible, no matter how much you wish it." Okrath grunted, his fists still clenched, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed slightly. Viren, too, seemed momentarily taken aback, though he quickly masked it with his usual composed expression. Isabella could see the cracks beginning to show in both of their defenses. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "I understand your threats, human," Okrath growled, his voice low and filled with menace. "But threats are meaningless without power to back them up. You talk of alliances and survival, but the Gorgeth are not afraid of empty promises. We are a race born to fight, and we will continue to fight until we are the last ones standing." Isabella took a deep breath. The time for subtlety was over. "You want power, General?" she asked, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Then you will find it in cooperation, not in destruction. But if you want to keep fighting, you will destroy yourselves. You will destroy everything. And when the dust settles, you will find that there is no one left to dominate." She could feel the room shift again, the weight of her words settling in. It was clear that the Gorgeth were no longer completely certain of their course, and the Elyethi, despite their outward confidence, were beginning to question their position as well. The galaxy was not just watching. They were waiting, poised for a decision that could reshape everything. The silence that followed was different now. It was heavy, pregnant with possibility. The factions were at a crossroads, and Isabella had given them a glimpse of the path forward. Whether they would take it or fall back into their destructive ways was yet to be seen. But for the first time, Isabella felt a sliver of hope flicker within her, a small but defiant light in the darkness. "If you want peace," she said quietly, "then choose it. But if you choose war, know that you will face something far greater than anything you've ever encountered. Humanity will not stand idly by." The finality in her words hung in the air as she turned to face her team. The message was clear. Earth would not be a bystander. Humanity had a stake in this galaxy, and whether they won or lost the peace talks, the galaxy would know that they had made their mark. The question now was whether the Gorgath and the Alyethi would recognize the new reality before it was too late. The room was still, every eye fixed on Isabella, waiting for the inevitable response from either the Gorgath or the Alyethi. General Okrath's massive frame loomed like a storm ready to unleash its fury, while Ambassador Viren's cool, silver eyes flickered with an unreadable depth of thought. The tension between them was like a live wire, crackling with potential energy, and Isabella could feel every ounce of it vibrating through her body. Finally, Okrath broke the silence with a sharp, almost dismissive snarl. "Enough of these empty words," he growled, standing up from his seat. "You talk of peace, of a new future, but your planet has no power to back it up. The Gorgath do not bend to sentiment, and we do not yield to threats from those weaker than us." Isabella's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her face calm, even as the words hit like a slap. She could feel the anger rising in her, the temptation to strike back, to challenge him further. But she knew better. Anger would only escalate this. She needed to stay focused, to show them that humanity's strength wasn't just in military might, but in resolve, in unity, and in their ability to outthink their enemies. She took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "You're right, General. The Gorgath are powerful. There's no denying that. But power is not enough to sustain an empire. If you want your people to thrive, to survive, you will need something more than just strength. You will need the capacity to adapt, to see that your place in the galaxy is no longer guaranteed by fear alone." The words seemed to strike a chord, and Okrath paused, his expression shifting for the briefest moment. It wasn't much, but Isabella caught it. The flicker of uncertainty, the subtle shift that told her that, for the first time, the Gorgath general was considering her words. Viren's voice cut through the tension, smooth and deliberate as ever. "And what do you propose, Ambassador Cole? What exactly are you offering the Gorgath? We're all aware that your species is new to the galactic stage, and while your bravery is commendable, you lack the resources, the experience, and the infrastructure to challenge established powers. So what is it that you think you can bring to the table that would make the Gorgath reconsider their path?" The Alyethi ambassador's words were a test, a challenge of his own. He was clever, always circling for an opening to manipulate, but Isabella was ready. She had anticipated this. The key to changing the course of this summit wasn't in brute force. It was in showing them that Earth had something they didn't fully understand yet. "We bring something more than just resources, Ambassador. We bring unity," she said, her voice steady, unyielding. "We have built an entire civilization based on collaboration, on alliances formed not through coercion, but through mutual respect. We have stood against impossible odds, and we fought not just for survival, but for a better future. That's the strength of humanity, the strength of our people. And when we form alliances, we don't just ask for power, we give it. We don't demand subjugation, we offer cooperation." The silence in the room stretched longer this time, the weight of her words sinking in. Okrath's fists clenched at his sides, but there was something different in the way he stood now, something more reflective, less certain of his own unassailable might. "And what makes you think the Gorgath would ever cooperate with a race like yours?" Okrath asked, his voice still low, but not as filled with the fury it once had been. "Because you have no other choice," Isabella said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You can continue down your path, and maybe you'll win a few more battles. But in the end, the Gorgath will fall just like every other empire that has relied on fear and bloodshed. The galaxy is changing, General, your enemies are not just the Liliathi. They are the countless other species who are beginning to unite, to see the truth that this war only brings ruin. If you stand alone, you will be consumed. But if you stand with us, with humanity, we can build something greater. Viren studied her, his silver eyes reflecting an unsettling intensity. You truly believe that humanity is the key to stopping this war? I believe we are the key to stopping the destruction of everything, Isabella replied firmly. We have seen the cost of this war. We've lived it, fought it, and survived it. And we won't stand by while two empires like yours tear the galaxy apart for a war that has no end. The time to change is now. We can either fight together for a new future, or we can destroy each other and watch the galaxy burn. That choice is in your hands. There was a long, heavy silence. The weight of her words hung in the air like an unanswered question, the future of the galaxy dangling on the edge of a knife. Both the Gorgath and the Liliathi were silent now, eyes locked on Isabella, as if for the first time they were beginning to see her not just as a human diplomat, but as a force capable of challenging everything they had believed. Okrath's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face flexing as he processed her words. Viren, too, seemed to be calculating, his mind turning over the possibilities. Neither of them spoke, but the tension had shifted. Isabella had given them something to think about, something they couldn't easily dismiss. The next move was theirs. Would they choose peace, or would they push the galaxy toward the brink of annihilation? The choice was still hanging in the air, but for the first time, Isabella felt like humanity had a chance to shape the galaxy's future. The silence that followed Isabella's words was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of a standoff, of defiance and hatred. It was the silence of contemplation. Both Okrath and Viren were still, their thoughts seemingly suspended in the air between them. The room felt suspended in time, as if the galaxy itself were waiting for their next move. Isabella could feel the weight of their gazes, the power of their scrutiny. She knew what was at stake, and the pressure was nearly overwhelming. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. If they walked away from the table now, the war would continue, with Earth standing in the crossfire. But if she could break through, if she could convince them that peace was not only possible but essential, everything could change. Okrath was the first to speak, his voice a low growl that reverberated through the room. I am not one to bow to words alone, human, he said, his eyes still burning with the pride of his people. We have fought wars since the dawn of time. Our blood is woven into the fabric of the stars. But perhaps it is time we reconsider our path. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. There was a crack in his voice now, a subtle change that suggested that his resolve was beginning to waver. But even so, he wasn't ready to yield completely. She needed to press the advantage, but she had to do it carefully. General Okrath, she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. I know that what I'm asking is not easy. I'm asking you to let go of everything you fought for, to break the cycle of destruction that has consumed your people for centuries. But you must see, this is not just about the Gorgath anymore. It's about the future of the galaxy, the future of all of us. Viren, who had been silent for the duration of Okrath's response, finally spoke, his voice smooth and calculating as always. And what of the Liliathi, Ambassador Cole? We are not without our own pride, our own legacy. Do you truly think we would abandon centuries of dominance simply because Earth offers an alternative? Isabella turned to him, meeting his gaze squarely. There was no question that the Liliathi would not easily give up their position as a power in the galaxy. Their long history of manipulation and control had shaped their worldview. But she could sense the shift in him as well, the flicker of doubt, the question of whether it was time for something new. I don't ask you to abandon your legacy, Ambassador, she said, her voice unwavering. I ask you to evolve. The Liliathi have thrived for centuries, but your empire is brittle. It is built on fear, on subjugation, and it has fractured. It is time for something different, A future where cooperation is not seen as weakness, but as strength. You can choose to continue the path of destruction, or you can choose a future where both the Gorgath and the Elyathi thrive alongside humanity. The weight of her words was undeniable, and for the first time, both factions seemed to be processing them fully. The air in the room felt different now, charged with possibility, with the potential for a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. Okrath's expression softened, though only slightly. "You ask for cooperation," he said slowly. "But what if it is too late? What if your kind cannot match our power? What if the galaxy itself does not welcome such a fragile alliance?" Isabella took a deep breath. "We will show you. We will demonstrate that cooperation can be stronger than force, that the combined strength of our species can surpass the destruction you have wrought for so long. But we cannot do it alone. We need you to stand with us. Together, we can forge a new future for the galaxy, one where power is not measured by how many worlds you can conquer, but by how many you can protect." Viren's expression finally shifted, the cold calculation in his eyes replaced by something more contemplative. His gaze flicked toward Okrath, and for a moment, there was no mistaking the silent conversation that passed between them. The two ancient empires, locked in endless conflict, were now facing a choice that they could no longer ignore. Finally, Okrath stood taller, his massive form looming over the table, his eyes never leaving Isabella's. His voice was a low rumble, but there was no mistaking the gravity of his words. "We have seen what Earth is capable of. You are not as weak as we once believed. And perhaps you are right. This war has gone on long enough. The Gorgath cannot continue down this path." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room, but Isabella remained silent, watching Okrath, watching Viren. The moment was fragile, too fragile to risk speaking until it had fully formed. Viren nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "The Elyathi will stand with the Gorgath. Then, we will consider your offer, human. But know this is not an easy path. We will not forget the history between our people, but if what you say is true, perhaps it is time for a new beginning." Isabella exhaled, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. The impossible had happened. The Gorgath and the Elyathi, two of the most powerful and destructive forces in the galaxy, had agreed to consider a ceasefire, to work toward a future built on cooperation instead of conquest. It wasn't a complete victory, not yet, but it was a start, and for the first time in her life, Isabella Cole knew that the future of the galaxy had just changed forever.